She collapsed in the rain. After her divorce, and woke up in the arms of a millionaire mafia boss. For a woman who has lost everything, collapsing in the rain is not a metaphor. It is the end. Wren Hayes believed her story was over, drowned by divorce and betrayal. She was a nobody, an anonymous soul shivering on the cold asphalt. But the arms that saved her from the storm did not belong to an angel. They belonged to a king of the underworld. Cillian Donnelly, a reclusive billionaire known only as the Quarry, a man who crushes his enemies and buries his secrets. The rescue was not an act of kindness. It was an act of memory, because Wren's face was the one ghost his empire of stone and shadow could never truly entomb. This is the saga of Rainfall and Remembrance, a story about second chances, dangerous secrets, and the fine line between protection and possession. If you are ready to uncover the truth behind this impossible reunion, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss Wren's journey. And comment below. Do you believe love can truly survive 12 years of silence? Prepare yourself. The storm is just beginning. The rain was not merely falling, it was a physical assault. Cold, relentless sheets of it slanted from a bruised purple sky, turning the elegant streets of Sovereign City into a dark, rushing river. Each drop that struck Wren Hayes felt like a judgment. The city's symphony, the distant wail of a siren, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, was the soundtrack to the end of her world. Her world was currently contained in a single, sad cardboard box. The edges were already turning to a dark, pulpy mush in her arms, the weight of its meager contents a pathetic summary of a decade-long life. A few worn books, a framed photograph, its glass now cracked, a small porcelain bird her grandmother had given her. Everything else, the life she had so carefully built, the home she had curated, now belonged to the woman who would be sleeping in her bed tonight. You're being emotional, Wren. It's not like I don't love you. I just don't love you enough. Carter's words, spoken with the casual cruelty of a man already halfway out the door, echoed in her mind, each syllable a fresh cut. He had not just broken her heart, he had erased her. She had poured herself into his life, his career, his ambition, until there was nothing of her left. And when he was done, he had discarded the empty vessel. A taxi sliced through a deep puddle beside her, sending a tidal wave of grimy, ice-cold water splashing up her legs, soaking the hem of her thin coat. She didn't even flinch. The cold outside was a pale imitation of the vast, frozen emptiness inside her chest. Her legs, numb and unfeeling, finally gave way. There was no dramatic cry, no theatrical collapse. It was a quiet, undignified surrender. Her knees simply buckled, and she crumpled onto the hard, wet pavement, the box spilling its contents across the sidewalk. The porcelain bird shattered, the sound a tiny, sharp crack in the roar of the storm. And that's when she broke. A sob, raw and ragged, tore itself from her throat. She curled over the wreckage of her life, her forehead pressed against the gritty, cold concrete, and let the rain wash over her, mingling with the hot, silent tears. She closed her eyes. It would be so easy to just stay here, to let the cold seep into her bones, to simply stop. This is it, she thought. A strange, distant calm settling over her. This is the end. Through the curtain of her wet hair, she saw them. Headlights. 2 perfect white circles of light, growing brighter, slowing. A car, long and dark and silent as a shark, had stopped just feet from her. It didn't belong here. It was a creature of immense wealth and power, momentarily paused in her gutter of despair. A door opened with a soft, expensive click. A figure emerged, shielded by a vast black umbrella. All she could see were immaculate black leather shoes that did not make a sound as they approached her on the wet pavement. The man knelt. The umbrella shifted, covering her, creating a sudden, shocking pocket of silence. A reprieve from the storm's assault. She could smell the rain on his woolen overcoat. A clean, sharp scent mixed with something else. Something like cold night air and ozone. Something dangerous. She lifted her head, her vision blurred by rain and tears. She saw a chiseled jaw, darkened by 5 o'clock shadow, a mouth set in a hard, grim line, and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea, shadowed and intense, that were staring at her not with pity, but with a look of raw, staggering disbelief. A jolt, like a forgotten memory, shot through her. Those eyes, her body, pushed beyond its limits, finally betrayed her. The world tilted, the bright headlights dissolving into streaks. Her last conscious thought was of a name, a ghost from a long-ago summer, a name she hadn't allowed herself to think in over a decade. Ian. The darkness took her, but it was not a cold darkness. It was warm. She felt herself being lifted from the pavement, her head lolling against a chest as solid as a seawall. She was wrapped in the woolen coat, cocooned in its impossible warmth and that strange, dangerous scent. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she was not falling. She was being held. Wren Hayes woke up to the sound of silence. It was a profound, weighted silence, the kind that only existed in places insulated from the world by extreme wealth. She was lying in a bed so large it felt like its own continent, beneath sheets that were impossibly soft against her skin. Her wet, ruined clothes were gone, replaced by a thick, dark silk robe. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through her. She sat up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The room was vast, minimalist, and exquisitely furnished. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of Sovereign City at night, the storm having passed, leaving the metropolis glittering like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Where was she? Who had brought her here? The door to the suite opened, and he walked in. He was no longer the boy from her memories. The lanky, sun-kissed youth who worked the docks was gone. This man was a titan, forged from iron and shadow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His dark hair was shorter, his face harder, carved into angles of ruthless authority. The only thing that remained of the boy was his eyes. Those same impossible, stormy gray eyes. He stopped in the center of the room, his hands in his pockets, his posture radiating a calm, absolute power. "You're awake," he said. It was not a question. His voice was different, too. Deeper. A low, controlled rumble that vibrated in the air. Wren clutched the silk robe tighter around herself. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Who are you? Where am I? A flicker of something, pain, regret, passed through his eyes before the mask of cold control slammed back into place. He took a slow step closer, and it was only then that she saw the faint silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He stopped a few feet from the bed, his gaze intense, searching her face as if memorizing every line. "You really don't remember me, do you, Wren?" he asked, her name on his lips a sound both familiar and foreign. Her breath caught. She did remember. She remembered everything. A sun-drenched pier, the taste of salt and stolen kisses, a promise whispered on a summer night. A boy who had vanished without a word, taking her heart with him. "Ian," she whispered, the name a fragile, broken thing. A sad, bitter smile touched his lips, a smile that held no warmth. "No one has called me that in a very long time," he said, his voice quiet, heavy with the weight of a decade. "My name is Cillian Donnelly." The name hung in the air between them, heavy and foreign. Cillian Donnelly. It meant nothing to her, a collection of hard, unfamiliar syllables. And yet, it was everything. It was the answer to a question she had stopped asking a decade ago. It was the name of the ghost who wore the face of the boy she had loved. Wren pulled her legs up to her chest, the silken sheets a cool, slippery barrier against the sudden, unnerving heat that radiated from him. Her initial panic was receding, replaced by a sharp, defensive confusion. The world outside the window was a dizzying display of wealth and power. The man standing before her was its king. This was not the reunion she might have once dreamed of in the foolish, lonely nights of her early 20s. This was an abduction. I need to get out of here. The thought was a clear, cold signal through the fog of her shock. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice stronger than she expected, edged with a steel she didn't know she possessed. "Mr. Donnelly." The name felt like a betrayal on her tongue, a formal rejection of the boy he had been. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He had felt the sting of her words. "Good. You collapsed," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, a simple recitation of fact. "On the street, in the middle of a storm. You were unwell. I brought you here." "To a hotel?" she pressed, gesturing vaguely at the opulent surroundings. A shadow of a smile, cold and without humor, touched his lips. "This is not a hotel. This is my home." His home. A penthouse that likely occupied the entire top floor of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. Her small, perfectly decorated suburban house, the one she had just lost, could fit in this single room. The sheer scale of his wealth was disorienting, an act of aggression in itself. It was designed to intimidate, to make others feel small. It was working. "Thank you for your assistance," she said, the words stiff. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, the silk robe whispering against her skin. She stood up, a deliberate act of claiming her own space, of refusing to be the vulnerable woman in his bed. "If you could just tell me where my things are, I'll be on my way." His gaze swept over her, taking in the borrowed robe, her bare feet on the plush, dark carpet. His eyes lingered for a fraction of a second on the faint, fading bruise on her wrist from where she'd fallen. When he met her eyes again, his were unreadable, chips of gray granite. "Your things are being laundered, and you are not going anywhere," he said. The calm finality of his statement sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. "You can't keep me here. Can I?" The question was soft, yet it held the unbending authority of a man who had never been told no. He took a step closer. She instinctively took a step back. "You are in no condition to leave, Ren. You are exhausted. You have no money, no phone, and nowhere to go. The world outside that door is not kind to women in your position. This one," he gestured to the room, "is." It was the cold, unassailable logic of his words that terrified her most. He was right. She had nothing. She was utterly, completely adrift. He had not just rescued her from the rain. He had plucked her from the wreckage of her life and placed her in this beautiful, sterile cage. Her rescuer. Her captor. "He's not protecting me," a voice screamed in her mind. "He's possessing me." "What do you want from me, Ian?" she asked, deliberately using his old name this time, a desperate attempt to find the boy in the man, to find a weakness in his armor. It worked. A muscle feathered in his jaw. The mask slipped, and for a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of the raw, profound pain she remembered from the night he had tried to explain his disappearance 12 years ago. "For you to be safe," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "That is all I have ever wanted." "Safe?" she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You call this safe? I wake up in a stranger's house, my clothes are gone, and I'm being held against my will by a man I haven't seen in a decade. A man who vanished without a word, without a single explanation." The anger, hot and righteous, was a welcome relief from the fear. It was a shield. "I did not have a choice," he growled, the control in his voice beginning to fray. "There's always a choice," she shot back, her voice rising. "You made yours. You left. You never looked back. So why now? Why after all this time do you suddenly decide to play the white knight?" He moved then, closing the distance between them in 2 long, silent strides. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the clean, cold scent of his skin. He was overwhelming, a force of nature that consumed all the air in the room. His hand came up, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would strike her. Instead, his fingers, surprisingly gentle, brushed a stray strand of damp hair from her cheek. His touch was a spark on her cold skin, a jolt that shot through her entire body, awakening nerves she had thought long dead. It was a touch she remembered. Because for 12 years, he said, his voice a low, tortured whisper, his eyes burning into hers, I convinced myself you were happy. I told myself that leaving you, that letting you go, was the one decent thing I had ever done. I watched you from a distance, your wedding, your perfect little life, and it was the penance I paid for the man I had to become. His thumb brushed against her lower lip, a feather-light touch that made her breath catch. But the woman I found on that street tonight, she was not happy. She was broken, he continued, his gaze filled with a darkness that seemed to swallow her whole. And I will tear this city apart, stone by stone, to find the man who broke you. The raw, possessive fury in his voice was terrifying, but beneath it, there was something else. A deep, aching grief, a profound, unhealed wound that mirrored her own. He was not just angry at Carter. He was angry at the world, at the fate that had stolen his life, his choices, and the one person he had ever allowed himself to care for. Ren stood frozen, trapped in the force of his presence, in the chaos of his confession. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But now, it was mingled with something else, something far more dangerous. A flicker of empathy, a treacherous, unwelcome echo of the bond they had once shared. The boy she had loved and the monster he had become were not two different people. They were one and the same, fused together by a tragedy she knew nothing about, and he had just declared a war on her behalf, a war she had no doubt he was capable of winning. She had collapsed in the rain to escape one man's world, only to wake up as the captive obsession of another's. The suite, for all its breathtaking luxury, became a battlefield of silence. Cillian left her after his declaration, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click that echoed the closing of a vault. He was true to his word. She was not a prisoner in a dungeon, but a guest in a gilded cage, a rare bird he refused to set free. Her laundered clothes appeared in the wardrobe, alongside an impossible collection of new ones. Cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, perfectly tailored trousers. The price tags had been discreetly removed, but she knew they represented more money than she had ever seen in her life. It was a silent assertion of his power, a way of erasing her past, of dressing her in the uniform of his world. She ignored them all, choosing to wear her own simple jeans and sweater. They felt like armor. Meals appeared on a trolley outside her door, exquisite dishes she barely touched. She spent her time pacing, a restless phantom haunting the edges of a life that was not hers. She would stand by the vast windows for hours, looking down at the city, a place that had once been her home, and now felt like a foreign planet. She was separated from it by 60 floors of glass and steel, and by the invisible, unyielding will of one man. On the third day, she found a sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils on the small writing desk by the window. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was another one of his silent maneuvers, a calculated gesture designed to show her that he saw her, that he remembered the girl who used to sit on the docks, sketching the seabirds and the weathered faces of the fishermen. A hot, bitter resentment flared in her chest. How dare he? How dare he use her own dreams against her, a tool to make this prison more comfortable? She refused to touch it. The sketchbook remained closed, a silent testament to her defiance. That evening he came to her room again. He did not knock. The door simply opened. He was holding 2 glasses and a bottle of wine that she recognized as being impossibly expensive. "You're not eating," he said, his voice a low rumble. He set the glasses down on the coffee table. "You'll make yourself ill." "And that would be an inconvenience for my keeper?" she retorted, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. He ignored the jibe, his movements fluid as he poured the deep crimson liquid into the glasses. "I thought we could talk. We have nothing to talk about. You made your choice 12 years ago." "Did I?" He looked up at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was so profound, it momentarily silenced her. "The choice was made for me. Sit, Ren." Please. The word, please, so alien coming from him, was what made her comply. She perched on the edge of an armchair, her posture rigid, a queen prepared to receive a distasteful emissary. He handed her a glass, his fingers brushing against hers. The brief contact was like a static shock, a jolt of unwanted familiarity. He did not sit. He prowled the room, a restless predator in his own territory, the wineglass held loosely in his hand. "My father was not a good man," he began, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on the glittering cityscape outside. He ran the Donnelly Syndicate, not the polished, semi-legitimate business it is today. In his time, it was cruder, more violent. He paused, taking a slow sip of his wine. "I was his only son, his heir. I was never meant to have a choice." Wren listened, her silence a reluctant invitation for him to continue. "I hated it," he confessed, the words raw, torn from a place of deep, buried pain. "I hated the fear in people's eyes, the whispers, the obligation. That summer, when I met you, it was the one time in my life I ran." He turned to face her, his eyes dark, haunted. "I used a different name. I got a job on the docks. I lived in a tiny, run-down apartment. I told my father I was backpacking through Europe. For 3 months I was just Ian. I was free. And I was a liar." The memory of that summer washed over her, so vivid it was a physical ache. The smell of salt and tar, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the easy laughter of a boy who spoke of designing buildings that would touch the sky, a boy who had looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. "You told me your parents were dead," she whispered, the old lie still holding a faint sting. "In a way they were," he said, a bitter twist to his lips. "The people who were supposed to be my parents, they were strangers, monsters. The boy you knew, Wren, he was real. He was the most real I have ever been." "Then why did you leave?" The question was the one that had haunted her for years, the one that had slowly poisoned her ability to trust, to love. "You just vanished. No note, no call, nothing." He walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass, his knuckles white as he gripped his wineglass. "The night I left you, the night I told you I would be back in the morning, I got a call," he said, his voice low, guttural. "My father's men. They had found me. They told me he was dead, assassinated, a rival family." He turned to her, and the agony in his face was so naked, so profound, it stole her breath. The choice was this: I could run, and let our entire family, our entire organization, be slaughtered in the war that would follow. Or I could go back, take my father's place, and become the monster they needed me to be to keep them safe. The silence that followed was immense, filled with the weight of his impossible choice. She saw it then. The path he had been forced to walk. He hadn't just left her. He had been ripped away, torn from the one life he had ever wanted, and thrust into a nightmare. He hadn't broken her heart out of cruelty. He had done it to save his world, sacrificing his own in the process. "You should have told me," she said, her voice barely a whisper, the anger draining out of her, leaving a hollow ache of shared sorrow. "And say what?" he countered, a desperate edge to his voice. "That the boy you love is the son of a crime boss? That if you stayed with me, you would be painting a target on your back for the rest of your life? I left you to protect you. It was the only way." He closed his eyes, a look of deep, soul-crushing weariness on his face. "I never stopped watching you, Wren. When you met Carter, when you got married, I told myself it was for the best, that he could give you the safe, normal life I never could." He opened his eyes, and they were burning with a fierce, possessive fire. "I was wrong. I left you to the mercy of a different kind of monster, a kinder, smiling one perhaps, but a monster nonetheless. And that is a mistake I will not make again." He placed his unfinished glass of wine on the table. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "You ask me what I want from you," he said, his back to her. "I want to undo the damage. I want to give you back the pieces of your life that he stole." He hesitated for a long, silent moment. "And I want you to draw again." The door closed, leaving her alone in the silent, opulent room. Ren stared at the closed sketchbook on the desk. The anger was gone. The resentment, a fading echo. In their place was a complex, painful empathy. The boy she had loved had not abandoned her. He had been sacrificed. And the man he had become was now trying to build a fortress around her, using the only tools he had: power, control, and a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. Slowly, she walked to the desk. She sat down, her fingers tracing the smooth, unmarked cover of the sketchbook. She opened it to the first blank page. Her hand trembled as she picked up a piece of charcoal. She did not draw the city. She did not draw a bird. She closed her eyes, and she drew a boy's face from memory, his smile full of sunlight, his eyes full of a future that had been stolen from them both. The drawing was a ghost on the page. It was an act of surrender, a confession in charcoal that Ren could not yet make with words. She had captured the memory of Ian, but in the shadows around his eyes, in the hard line of his jaw that she hadn't intended to draw, she saw the faint, unmistakable silhouette of Cillian. They were one. A truth her heart was beginning to accept, even as her mind recoiled from its implications. She left the sketchbook open on the desk, a silent offering, a white flag in their Cold War. The next morning, it was gone. In its place was a single perfect white orchid in a small minimalist vase. There was no note. There never was. But the message was clear. I saw. I understand. A fragile truce settled over the penthouse. The silence was no longer a weapon, but a shared space. Cillian kept his distance, but his presence was a constant, low hum of awareness. He began leaving things for her. An art history book on the coffee table, a selection of classical music playing softly when she woke up. They were small, calculated gestures, but they felt like apologies, like attempts to rebuild a bridge across a 12-year chasm of pain and silence. Ren, in turn, began to live in the space. She ate the meals that were brought to her. She read the books. She allowed the quiet luxury of her cage to soothe the raw, frayed edges of her soul. For the first time since the divorce, she felt the oppressive weight on her chest begin to lift. She was breathing again. It was a dangerous, seductive peace. The peace shattered on a Tuesday. Cillian had been gone since dawn, attending to business she knew better than to ask about. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the ferries glide across the gray, choppy water of the harbor, when a black helicopter ascended from a nearby rooftop, its blades slicing through the air with a percussive whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. It was a sight so alien to her old suburban life, a display of such casual, immense power that it was mesmerizing. As it banked, the sun glinted off the cockpit window, and for a split second she saw it. A flash, like a camera lens. An icy chill, completely unrelated to the autumn air, prickled down her spine. It was a feeling she couldn't explain. A primal sense of being watched, hunted. She stepped back from the window, her heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. It's nothing, she told herself. You're being paranoid. But the feeling lingered, a cold shadow in the bright, sunlit room. Later that afternoon, she decided to brave the rooftop garden, a private oasis of manicured greenery and stunning views that she had so far avoided. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. She trailed her fingers through the lavender bushes, the scent calming her frayed nerves. She was standing by the glass balustrade, looking down at the intricate tapestry of the city 60 floors below, when she heard the soft chime of the private elevator. She expected one of the staff. It was Cillian. He strode out onto the terrace, his face a mask of thunderous fury. He was on the phone, his voice a low, lethal snarl of Russian. He didn't seem to notice her. He was a storm of contained violence, his entire body radiating a barely suppressed rage that made the air around him feel thin and cold. He finished his call with a clipped, final word and shoved the phone into his pocket. He turned and finally saw her. The fury in his eyes did not soften. It intensified. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. Ren recoiled, stung by the harshness of his tone. "I was just getting some air." "Get inside," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Don't talk to me like that," she retorted, her own anger flaring. "You don't own me. I'm not one of your soldiers to be ordered around." "No," he said, stalking towards her, his eyes blazing. "You are not. A soldier knows how to defend himself. You are a civilian, standing in the middle of a battlefield." He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. It didn't hurt, but the force of it, the sheer, unyielding strength, was terrifying. He dragged her back towards the elevator. "What is wrong with you?" she cried, struggling against his hold. He stopped, whirling to face her. He backed her against the glass wall of the terrace, his hands coming up to cage her in, his palms flat against the glass on either side of her head. He was so close she could see the flecks of silver in his stormy gray eyes, feel the heat of his anger rolling off him in waves. "What's wrong?" he repeated, his voice a low, shaking whisper of pure rage. "What's wrong is that the Lazarev brothers now have a high-resolution photograph of your face." The helicopter, the flash of light. It hadn't been her imagination. "They know I have a woman staying in my home," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, each word a chip of ice. "They do not see a guest, Ren. They see a lever. They see a soft target. They see a way to get to me, to break me. That has nothing to do with bullets or bombs." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. She could feel his breath, warm and ragged against her skin. "I have spent my entire life building walls, armor. I have made myself a man with nothing to lose. And in the space of a week, you... He couldn't finish the sentence. He closed his eyes, a look of profound, agonizing vulnerability crossing his features. He was not angry at her. He was terrified for her. The depth of his fear was a revelation. It was the terrified fury of a man who had finally found something to lose, only to realize he had brought it into the heart of the fire. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a cold, clear understanding of the truth. He was right. This was not a game. The danger was not an abstract concept. It was real. It had a name, Lazarev. It had a face. And now, it had hers. "What do we do?" she whispered, the question an admission of her own fear, an acknowledgement that her safety was now inextricably linked to his. Cillian opened his eyes. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The emotion was gone. The quarry was back. "We do not run," he said, his voice flat and devoid of all warmth. "We do not hide." He pushed himself away from her, stepping back, the space between them once again a formal, unbridgeable chasm. "We teach them," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant, indifferent sky. "That my weaknesses have teeth." He turned and strode back to the elevator without another word, leaving Ren alone on the rooftop, the wind cold against her skin. The beautiful panoramic view no longer looked like a glittering promise. It looked like a hunting ground. And for the first time, she understood that the most dangerous animal in this urban jungle was not the one hunting her. It was the one trying to protect her. The penthouse, once a symbol of intimidating wealth, now felt like a fortress under siege. The invisible walls of Cillian's protection had become tangible, suffocating. After the incident on the terrace, the staff moved with a new, silent urgency. Security protocols, once discreet, were now a visible, humming presence. Ren was no longer just a guest. She was the asset to be guarded, the heart of the castle. The illusion of freedom was gone, replaced by the stark reality of her situation. She was safe, and she was trapped. A restless energy consumed her. Confined to the suite, the glittering city view now felt like a taunt. The peace she had begun to feel was replaced by a low-grade, persistent anxiety. She needed to move, to breathe air that wasn't recycled and conditioned. One afternoon, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name, she found herself in the east wing of the penthouse, a section she hadn't yet explored. It was quieter here, the opulent decor giving way to something more personal. At the end of a long, stark white corridor was a single door made of dark, reclaimed wood. It had no handle, only a discreet biometric scanner glowing with a faint silver light. It was the only locked door she had ever encountered in the entire residence. It was his private space, the heart of the labyrinth. She turned to leave, a familiar feeling of frustration and helplessness washing over her. But as she did, the scanner beside the door blinked from silver to green, and with a barely audible hiss, the heavy door clicked open, swinging inward just an inch. He had unlocked it for her. From wherever he was in the city, he had seen her on a security feed and granted her access. It was not an invitation. It was an act of surrender, a gesture of trust so profound it made her heart ache. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door open. The room was not what she expected. It was not an office filled with monitors and weapons. It was not a vault filled with gold. It was a sanctuary of ghosts. The air inside was different, still and quiet, carrying the faint, clean scent of charcoal, paper, and wood glue. The room was a vast, open-plan studio, bathed in natural light from a massive skylight. But it wasn't the space that made her breath catch in her throat. It was what filled it. Architectural models of breathtaking, impossible buildings stood on pedestals. Detailed blueprints and intricate design sketches were pinned to every wall. It was a room filled with dreams, the tangible evidence of a life that had been brutally murdered. This was the room of Ian, the boy who had wanted to build things that touched the sky. She drifted through the space, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of a miniature skyscraper, the smooth curve of a bridge designed to span an imaginary river. This was where he came, she realized, when the weight of being the quarry became too much. This was the only place in the world where he was not a king or a monster, but simply a creator. On a large drafting table in the center of the room, she saw it, the sketchbook he had given her. It was open to the page where she had drawn his younger self, and surrounding it were dozens of other drawings. They were all of her. Loose sheets of charcoal paper, filled with sketches of her face, drawn from memory over a span of 12 years. Her at 18, laughing on the pier, the sun in her hair. Her a few years later, a more thoughtful expression on her face, an image he must have seen in a newspaper or online. Her on her wedding day, a bride smiling for the camera, a drawing filled with an almost unbearable sadness. He had captured her life from a distance, a silent, unseen guardian, chronicling the happiness he believed he had secured for her. He had never stopped watching. He had never forgotten. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and thick, blurring the charcoal lines. The gesture was not the act of a possessive jailer. It was the work of a man holding on to the one pure thing in his life with a desperate, heartbreaking devotion. Tucked beneath one of the larger sketches was a small, worn photograph. The original. The one she thought was lost to time. The two of them on the docks, young and tan and deliriously happy, squinting into the sun, utterly oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their lives. She picked it up, her thumb stroking the faded image of the boy who had stolen her heart. She sank into the worn leather chair by the desk, the silence of the room wrapping around her, and finally let herself grieve. She wept for the girl she had been, for the boy he had lost, and for the 12 years of stolen time that lay between them like a vast, empty ocean. She didn't hear him enter. She only knew he was there when a shadow fell over her. She looked up. Cillian was standing beside the chair, his face stripped bare of all its masks. There was no anger, no authority. There was only a raw, unguarded vulnerability. He was looking at the photograph in her hand, his expression one of profound, ancient pain. He had been exposed. She had walked into the one undefended room of his soul. "I kept it," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. It was the only thing I took with me from that life. Ren's tears fell onto the photograph. She quickly tried to wipe them away, but his hand came down, gently covering hers, stopping her. His skin was warm, his touch steady. "You never stopped," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She wasn't talking about the photograph. She was talking about the blueprints, the models, the dozens of drawings of her face. Even after everything, you never let the dream die. He withdrew his hand and walked over to a model of a beautiful, soaring concert hall, his fingers tracing its impossible curves. "In here," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm not him. I'm not my father's son. In here, I can build things instead of breaking them." He turned to face her, and his eyes, for the first time, were not stormy. They were clear, and they were filled with a deep, aching love that he no longer tried to hide. "This life, this power, it means nothing, Ren. It's a cage. The only real thing in it has always been the memory of you." The confession was simple, unadorned, and it shattered the last of her defenses. The fear she had felt for him, the resentment, the confusion, it all dissolved, replaced by a wave of protective empathy so fierce it felt like a physical blow. She saw the truth. He wasn't her captor. He was a prisoner too, trapped in a life he had never wanted. She stood up and walked to him. She did not hesitate. She reached out and placed her hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel its slow, heavy, steady beat beneath her palm. It was the beat of a man who had been holding his breath for 12 years. He closed his eyes, a shudder running through his powerful frame. He did not touch her. He just stood there, letting her in, giving her a part of himself he had never shown another living soul. In the silent sanctuary of his lost dreams, surrounded by the ghosts of who they might have been, Ren Hayes made a choice. She would no longer be a victim of her past or a prisoner of her present. She would become the guardian of his. The discovery in the architect's studio was a key turning a lock. The dynamic in the penthouse did not just shift, it was fundamentally remade. The invisible line that had separated them, the line between captor and captive, between monster and victim, had dissolved, leaving them in a strange, uncharted territory of fragile intimacy. Cillian did not retreat back into his shell of cold authority. It was as if showing her his sanctuary, his one vulnerability, had freed him. He began to seek her out, not with demands, but with quiet offerings of his time. He would find her reading in the living area, and instead of disappearing into his study, he would pour himself a drink and take a seat in the armchair across from her. They would sit in a silence that was no longer heavy with unspoken anger, but full of a humming, electric awareness. Ren found herself watching him over the top of her book. She studied the way the firelight carved shadows under his sharp cheekbones, the intense focus in his eyes as he reviewed documents, the almost imperceptible way his shoulders would relax when he was in her presence. He was still a dangerous man. She never forgot that. The power radiated from him like a low-frequency hum, but he was no longer a monster. He was just Cillian. She, in turn, began to reclaim pieces of herself. She drew. She filled the sketchbook with images from her memory, and the new, starkly beautiful world around her. She drew the cityscape at dawn, the intricate frost patterns on the window panes, the sharp, elegant lines of the orchid he had left for her. She was breathing again, and the air, for the first time, felt like her own. One evening, she was in the library, a smaller, more intimate space than his studio, filled with worn, leather-bound books and the faint scent of old paper and cedar. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. She was researching a painter mentioned in one of her art history books, carefully turning the brittle pages of a heavy, antique volume. The edge of a page, sharp as a razor, sliced across the soft skin of her palm. It was a small, shallow cut, but it welled up with a surprising amount of blood, a single, perfect crimson bead. She flinched, pulling her hand back with a soft hiss of breath. "What is it?" His voice, low and immediate, came from the doorway. She hadn't even heard him enter. Cillian stood there, having shed his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing strong, capable wrists and a network of faint, silvery scars. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, immediately fixed on her hand. In 2 long, silent strides, he was beside her, his presence eclipsing the warmth of the fire. Before she could protest that it was nothing, he gently took her hand in his. His touch was a shock. His hands, which she knew could command an empire and end lives, were impossibly gentle. His fingers were warm, his calloused skin a stark contrast to her own. He examined the cut with a focused intensity, his brow furrowed in a slight frown. The air between them grew thick, charged. The vast library shrank to the tiny, intimate space between their bodies. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice a low rumble. He returned a moment later with a small lacquered first aid box. He knelt before her chair, a startling act of deference from a man who bowed to no one. He opened the box, the contents neat and precise. He worked with a quiet, focused efficiency. He cleaned the small cut with an antiseptic wipe. The sting was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the electric jolt that shot up her arm as he held her hand. His head was bowed, giving her a perfect view of the dark, thick lashes that shadowed his eyes, the intense line of his jaw. She could feel his breath, slow and steady, on her skin. She could smell the clean, sharp scent of his soap, mixed with the faint, masculine scent that was uniquely his. He took a small bandage, and with a surgeon's precision, wrapped it around her palm. His fingers lingered on hers for a fraction of a second too long, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of her wrist. It was a deliberate, possessive, yet incredibly tender gesture. He finally looked up, and his stormy gray eyes, now just inches from hers, were dark with an emotion she could not name. It was a raw, unfiltered longing, a hunger that had been starved for 12 years. The entire world, the danger outside, the ghosts of the past, it all fell away. There was only the crackle of the fire, the scent of old books, and the overwhelming, undeniable pull between them. The air grew thin, heavy. She saw his gaze drop from her eyes to her lips. She saw the slight parting of his own. Her heart was no longer beating. It was aching, a slow, heavy throb that echoed the rhythm of the unspoken question hanging between them. This was no longer about a fragile truce. This was about the inevitable surrender. He began to lean in, his movements slow, hesitant, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. She couldn't. She was caught, mesmerized, a willing captive in the gravitational pull of him. She closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat, waiting for the impact. And then, the sharp, intrusive ring of his secure phone shattered the moment into 1,000 pieces. The ring of the phone was a gunshot in the sacred quiet of the library. The effect on Cillian was instantaneous and absolute. The man who had been leaning towards her, his eyes soft with a decade of unspoken longing, vanished. In his place, the quarry materialized. His body went rigid, his jaw locked, and the warmth in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by the flat, cold gray of polished steel. He pulled back as if she were the source of a flame, his expression shuttered and unreadable. He answered the phone without looking at it, his voice a low, lethal command. "What?" Ren watched, her heart a wild, frantic bird in her chest, the ghost of the kiss still tingling on her lips. She could only hear one side of the conversation, a series of clipped, guttural questions in Russian. She didn't need to understand the words to comprehend the meaning. She saw it in the tightening of the muscles in his forearms, in the way his gaze became distant and sharp, calculating angles in a battle she couldn't see. He hung up without a goodbye. The silence that descended was different now. The fragile, intimate bubble had not just burst. It had been obliterated, leaving a vacuum of cold, hard reality in its place. "The Lazarevs," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion it had held just moments before. He walked to the window, staring out into the night, his posture once again that of a general surveying a battlefield. They've made their move. What did they do? Wren asked, her own voice a strained whisper. She wrapped her arms around herself, the warmth from the fire no longer reaching her. Subtlety is not their strength, he said with a cold, contemptuous curl of his lip. They didn't come for me. They came for my name. The annual Sovereign City Children's Hospital Gala is tomorrow night. My mother was the original patron. Since her death, I have been its primary benefactor. It's the one truly legitimate, public-facing part of my life. He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the city. There was a fire at the venue tonight. An electrical fault, the fire department is calling it. But my men on the inside say it was arson. A message, sent with gasoline and a match. Wren felt a wave of nausea. They hadn't just attacked a building. They had attacked a children's hospital charity. They had attacked the memory of his mother. They are testing me, Cillian continued, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. They want to see if I will retreat, if I will pull my funding, cancel the event, hide behind my walls now that I have a liability. The word hung in the air, unspoken, but understood. Now that I have you. They expect me to show fear, to protect my new weakness. He turned from the window, and his eyes, hard and brilliant as diamonds, pinned her in place. So, we will do the opposite. A cold dread crept up her spine. What does that mean? It means the gala will proceed, at a new venue. My hotel on the Grand Concourse, he stated, his tone leaving no room for debate. And it means we will be in attendance. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. No, Cillian, no, I can't. You said it yourself, I'm a target. Putting me on display like that. It's insane. It is the only move we have, he countered, walking slowly towards her, his presence once again overwhelming. Hiding you now, after they have your picture, confirms their theory. It proves you are my weakness. It paints a bigger target on your back than ever before. But to walk into that ballroom, at my side, untouchable, that is not a show of weakness. That is a show of force. It tells them, and the entire city, that you are not my vulnerability. He stopped in front of her, his gaze intense. It tells them you are my strength. Her mind reeled. It was a terrifying, brilliant, and utterly insane piece of psychological warfare. He wanted to use her, not as a shield, but as a sword. I don't know if I can do that, she whispered. The thought of all those eyes on her, of the danger lurking in the shadows, making her feel physically ill. You can, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Wren. You survived your husband. You survived me. You can survive this. He reached out, not to touch her, but holding his hand, palm up, in the space between them. An offering. A choice. I will be with you every second. I will not let anything happen to you. I swear it. She looked from his outstretched hand to his face. She saw the iron will of the quarry, the ruthless strategist who would burn the world for his cause. But underneath, she saw the desperate plea of the boy who was asking her, for the first time, to be his partner, to fight alongside him. Her fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. But the thought of hiding, of letting these faceless monsters dictate her life, was worse. She had spent a decade living in the shadow of a man. She would not do it again. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. A silent pact was sealed. The next evening, the penthouse was a whirlwind of quiet, efficient activity. A woman with a French accent and a measuring tape appeared, followed by racks of couture gowns. A jeweler arrived with velvet trays of diamonds and sapphires that glittered with a cold, brilliant fire. Wren stood before a full-length mirror, a stranger in her own skin. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her like a second skin, leaving her shoulders bare. A necklace of sapphires, the color of the deep ocean, rested against her collarbone, cold and heavy. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, her face artfully painted into a mask of serene confidence. She looked like one of them, a queen of the underworld. The door to her suite opened, and Cillian walked in. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a vision of dark, lethal elegance. He stopped dead when he saw her. His breath caught, a small, almost inaudible sound. His eyes raked over her, a slow, appreciative burn that was more intimate than any touch. The mask of the quarry was gone, replaced by a look of raw, unguarded awe. "Ren," he breathed, the name a sound of reverence. He walked to her, stopping before the mirror. He stood behind her, their reflections captured together. The Dark King and his unexpected queen. He was power. She was grace. And together, they were a declaration. He met her eyes in the mirror, his own blazing with a fierce, possessive fire. "Tonight," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur meant only for her. "We are not going to a party." He placed his hands on her bare shoulders, his touch sending a shiver through her. "We are going to war." The Grand Concourse Hotel was a cathedral of wealth. Its ballroom was a breathtaking cavern of glittering crystal chandeliers and soaring marble columns, a world away from the gritty, rain-slicked street where Cillian had found her. Ren felt the pressure of 1,000 pairs of eyes as she walked into the room, her hand resting lightly on Cillian's arm. His presence was a fortress beside her, a wall of calm, lethal power. Every head turned. A wave of whispers, soft and sibilant as rustling silk, followed them across the polished floor. She was the mystery, the woman who had appeared from nowhere at the side of the city's most reclusive and dangerous man. She kept her chin high, her expression serene, channeling the queen she appeared to be. But beneath the silk and sapphires, her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "He is a storm. I am the eye." The thought was a mantra, a prayer. Cillian guided her through the sea of sovereign cities' elite. Politicians with predatory smiles, heiresses dripping with diamonds, business titans with cold, calculating eyes. He was a king in his court, nodding curtly, his grip a firm, reassuring pressure on the small of her back. He was projecting an aura of untouchable authority, and by extension she was enveloped in it. From across the room, she saw them. Two men, built like bears, in impeccably tailored suits that did nothing to hide their brutal physicality. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes, small and hard, followed her every move. The Lazarev brothers, the serpents in this glittering Eden. Cillian's fingers tightened on her back for a fraction of a second. "I see them." The evening was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Cillian was not just attending a party, he was holding court. He introduced Ren, his voice smooth and proprietary. "This is Ren Hayes." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. His tone, his posture, the way he looked at her, it was all a declaration. "She is mine. Touch her, and you touch me." Ren played her part. She smiled. She made polite, meaningless conversation, her mind a whirlwind of observation. She saw the fear behind the polite smiles of the people they met. She saw the deference. She was beginning to understand the sheer, terrifying scale of his power. An hour into the evening, Cillian was pulled away by a senator. It was the moment she had been dreading. For the first time, she was alone. She turned to the bar to get a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. "You wear his gilded cage well." The voice was low and accented, coming from just behind her. She turned. It was the younger of the two Lazarev brothers, his smile a thin, predatory slash. Ren's blood ran cold, but she kept her face a placid mask. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cool. "Have we been introduced?" "Not formally," he said, his eyes raking over her with an insulting familiarity. "But we feel we know you. We are admirers of Mr. Donnelly's recent acquisitions." He gestured to her sapphire necklace. "He has expensive taste, but beautiful things are so easily broken." The threat was unmistakable. A shard of ice slipped into the warm, champagne-filled air. "I am not a thing," Ren said. her voice quiet, but ringing with a sudden, cold fury she didn't know she possessed. She met his gaze without flinching. "And you would be wise to remember that." Before he could respond, Cillian was there. He had moved with a supernatural silence, a shadow detaching itself from the crowd. He did not look at Lazarev. He looked only at Ren, his expression one of calm, possessive concern. "Is this man bothering you, my dear?" he asked, the endearment a deliberate public claim. The temperature around them dropped by 20 degrees. Lazarev's smirk faltered, a flicker of fear in his eyes. He had been caught. "Not at all," Ren replied, her voice smooth as silk. She gave Lazarev a dismissive, brilliant smile. "He was just admiring my necklace, weren't you?" Cillian's hand came to rest on the small of her back, a gesture of both possession and protection. His gaze finally shifted to Lazarev, and his eyes were flat, empty, devoid of all life. It was the most terrifying expression Ren had ever seen. "My taste is not for public discussion," Cillian said, his voice a soft, chilling whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, while you can." Lazarev paled. He gave a stiff, jerky nod and melted back into the crowd like a frightened snake. Cillian guided her away, towards a set of French doors that led to a secluded moonlit balcony. As soon as they were outside, the cool night air hitting her skin, the strength in her legs gave out. She sagged against the cold stone balustrade, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Are you all right?" Cillian asked, his hands hovering, not touching her, giving her space. "I told him," she whispered, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "I told him I wasn't a thing." "I know," he said, his voice filled with a fierce, profound pride. "I heard." She looked up at him, the glittering city a backdrop to his dark, imposing figure. The danger was real. The threat had been inches from her face, and she hadn't broken. "You were right," she said. "You are a storm, but I am not the eye." She took a shaky breath, a new, unfamiliar strength hardening her voice. "I am the lightning that rides at your side." A slow, genuine smile spread across Cillian's face. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile, and it transformed him. The cold, hard mask of the quarry dissolved, and for a fleeting, breathtaking moment, she saw the boy from the docks, the man from the studio, the king of this dark world, all in one. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I know you are," he whispered. The music from the ballroom drifted out to them, a slow, haunting melody. The threat was not over. The war was just beginning. But here, on this balcony, suspended between the stars and the city lights, they were not a Don and his liability. They were not a king and his queen. They were a storm and the lightning. And for the first time, they were facing the same direction. He lowered his head, and this time, there was no hesitation. This time, no phone call would interrupt them. As his lips finally met hers, it was not a surrender. It was not a ceasefire. It was an anointing. A coronation. The sealing of a vow far more powerful than any made at an altar. The kiss was a tectonic shift. It realigned their universe, cementing the fragile truce into an unbreakable, unspoken alliance. The drive back to the penthouse was a blur of city lights. But for the first time, the silence in the car was not a void. It was a shared space, filled with the low, humming energy of what had just passed between them. Back in the suite, Cillian led her to the window. The glittering cityscape spread beneath them like their own private kingdom. "They will not stop," he said, his voice a low rumble, his hands resting on her shoulders as they looked out at the city. Tonight was a declaration of war. They saw strength where they expected to find weakness. They will become desperate. "What will they do?" Ren asked, her fear a distant echo, overshadowed by the solid, grounding presence of him behind her. "They will come for you," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of all illusion. "It is the only move they have left. They cannot beat me in business. They cannot beat me in the streets. So they will try to take my heart." He turned her to face him, his stormy eyes boring into hers. "Which is why you will not leave my side. Not for a second. Do you understand?" She nodded, her throat tight. In the days that followed, the fortress became their world. Cillian did not leave for meetings. The meetings came to him. A parade of men in dark suits, lawyers with grim faces and soldiers with hard eyes, moved through the penthouse. But Cillian kept his promise. Ren was a silent, constant presence, either in an armchair in the corner of his study or by the window in his office, a book in her lap. Her presence had a strange effect on his men. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and a new, profound respect. She was not the Don's weakness. She was a fixture, a calm, steady center in the eye of the storm. She was the quarry's queen. The attack, when it came, was not the brutal, frontal assault they expected. It was insidious, a whisper, a betrayal. It happened during a late-night strategy session. Cillian was at the head of his conference table, flanked by his most trusted men, including Stefan, the head of his personal security. Ren sat by the fireplace, sketching, a silent observer. They were discussing supply routes at the port, a critical artery of the Donnelly Empire. Cillian paused mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing on a set of blueprints. "The security schedules for Pier 4 are wrong. These are the old rotations." Stefan paled. "That's impossible, sir. I updated them myself this morning." "Then someone has accessed our server and reverted to the old data," Cillian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's a feint. They want our focus on the port. They are planning to hit us somewhere else." His eyes, sharp and immediate, shot across the room and locked with Ren's. It was not a question. It was a sudden, terrifying certainty. At that exact moment, the lights in the penthouse flickered once, twice, and died. They were plunged into an inky, absolute darkness, broken only by the faint orange glow of the dying embers in the fireplace. "Stefan, status." Cillian's voice was a whip crack in the dark. "Emergency power should have kicked in, sir. It's a total system failure. They've cut us off." Ren's heart hammered in her chest. She stood up, her eyes straining to adjust to the gloom. She could hear the rustle of clothing as Cillian's men drew their weapons. "Ren, do not move," Cillian commanded, his voice a low, calming rumble from across the room. But it was too late. A hand, rough and smelling of stale smoke, clamped over her mouth. An arm, thick as a steel cable, wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She tried to scream, but the sound was a muffled, desperate gasp. She kicked out, her heel connecting with a shin, but the man's grip was unbreakable. She was being dragged backward, away from the fireplace, away from the sound of Cillian's voice. "They're in the room!" a man shouted. The darkness erupted in a chaotic symphony of violence, the sound of a heavy body hitting the floor, a muffled grunt of pain, the sharp, terrifying crack of a gunshot, deafening in the enclosed space. "Cillian!" Ren screamed, the name torn from her as the hand over her mouth slipped for a second. "Ren!" His roar was primal, a sound of pure, unrestrained fury. She heard him fighting his way towards her, a force of destruction in the dark. But her captor was too fast. She felt the cold night air on her back as a door to a service balcony was wrenched open. Below, the city lights glittered, a beautiful, indifferent witness. A rope ladder was slung over the side of the balcony. Her abductor began to force her over the balustrade. This was their escape route, an impossible, insane descent down the side of the skyscraper. She looked down, and a wave of vertigo and terror threatened to overwhelm her. She was going to die. Then he was there. Cillian exploded onto the balcony, a silhouette of pure, lethal rage against the faint glow of the city. He didn't have a gun. He was the weapon. He launched himself at Ren's captor without a sound. The impact was brutal, a sickening thud of bone against bone. The man's grip on her loosened, and she fell back onto the hard floor of the balcony, gasping for air. The two men were a whirlwind of vicious close-quarters combat. It was not a clean fight. It was a desperate, savage brawl on the edge of the world. Ren scrambled backward, her mind numb with shock. She saw the glint of a knife in the attacker's hand. He lunged. Cillian moved with a speed that was inhuman. He caught the man's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crack. The knife clattered to the floor. Cillian drove his fist into the man's throat, then his stomach. The man doubled over, gasping. With a final guttural roar, Cillian grabbed the man by his jacket and collar, and with a surge of pure adrenaline-fueled strength, heaved him over the balustrade. The man did not scream. He simply vanished into the abyss. A profound, ringing silence descended, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling around the corner of the building and Cillian's own harsh, ragged breathing. He stood with his back to her for a long moment, his hands braced on the balustrade, his head bowed. He was not a Don. He was not the quarry. He was a man who had just been pushed to the absolute brink of his control. Slowly, he turned. In the faint ambient light from the city below, she could see the dark gash on his cheekbone and the terrifying cold fire in his eyes. He crossed the balcony and knelt before her, his hands gently framing her face, his touch a stark contrast to the violence she had just witnessed. "Are you hurt?" he whispered, his voice raw, shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. She could only shake her head, her throat too tight to speak. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. His embrace was not gentle. It was a desperate, possessive claiming, a silent, furious promise that he would never let her go again. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, her body racked with tremors. She was safe. Over her head, Cillian's gaze was fixed on the open door to his penthouse. His men were securing the room, the sounds of a battle won. But his face was a mask of cold, unforgiving fury. The serpents had not just entered his home. They had put their hands on his queen. This was no longer business. This was not about territory or power. This was about retribution. And he would burn the Lazarev Empire to the ground, leaving nothing but salt and ash. The aftermath of the attack was a cold, controlled fury. The lights flickered back on, revealing a scene of calculated chaos. Cillian's study was in disarray. 2 of the Lazarev assassins lay dead, and 1 of his own men was wounded. The traitor, a junior guard who had disabled the security from the inside, was captured, his face a mask of pale, sweating terror. Ren watched from the periphery as Cillian moved through the scene. He was no longer her protector, nor the boy from her past. He was the quarry, a chillingly efficient instrument of command. He issued a series of low, precise orders. His voice never rose, yet it carried an absolute authority that made hardened men flinch. He orchestrated the cleanup, the care for his wounded man, and the interrogation of the traitor with a terrifying, detached focus. He did not speak to her. He did not even look at her. But she felt his awareness of her like a physical presence, a constant, low hum at the edge of his perception. He was walling himself off, becoming the weapon he needed to be to end this. And it terrified her, not for her own safety, but for his. She saw the cost of his power, the piece of his soul he had to sacrifice to wield it. An hour later, he walked over to her. The room was quiet again, the bodies gone, the broken furniture arranged. The only evidence of the fight was a dark stain on the Persian rug. "Stefan will take you to a safe location upstate," he said, his voice flat, his eyes cold and distant. "You will remain there until I am finished." It was not a request. It was an order of exile. He was pushing her away, putting her back in a cage, albeit for her own protection. The Ren of a few weeks ago would have crumpled. The Ren of a few days ago would have argued. But the woman who had faced down a Lazarev at a gala and survived an assassination attempt looked him straight in the eye. "No," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. He blinked, the first crack in his iron facade. "This is not a negotiation, Ren." "I know," she said, stepping closer to him, invading his space, forcing him to see her not as a liability, but as a person. "You are going to go to war. You are going to burn their world to the ground. I understand that. But you will not do it alone. You will not become the monster your father was, the one who walled himself off from everyone. I will not be your weakness, Cillian, but I will not be your excuse to lose yourself either. She reached up and gently touched the gash on his cheekbone, her fingers tracing the sharp, angry line. I am not leaving, she said, her voice softening. I am staying right here, in your home, in your heart, so you have something to come back to when you are finished. He stared at her, and she watched as the walls within him, the carefully constructed defenses of a lifetime, crumbled. The coldness in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a raw, profound vulnerability. He pulled her to him, his forehead resting against hers, his breath a ragged, unsteady thing. I do not deserve you, he whispered, the confession a sound of pure, agonized truth. Then become the man who does, she replied, her hand moving to the back of his neck, holding him. Come back to me, Cillian. He did not go to war that night. He waged it. From the penthouse, which had become their fortress and their home, he dismantled the Lazarev Empire with a surgeon's precision. It was not a war fought with bullets, but with information, with leverage, with the silent, brutal efficiency of his power. He exposed their political allies, froze their offshore accounts, and turned their own lieutenants against them with promises of amnesty. In 72 hours, the Lazarev name was nothing more than a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of Sovereign City. On the fourth day, Cillian walked into the architect's studio where Wren was sketching. He was dressed not in a suit, but in a simple gray sweater that she remembered from the photograph of their long-ago summer. He looked tired, the lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. But he was at peace. The storm was over. He said nothing. He simply walked to her, knelt before her chair, and took her hand. He brought it to his lips and pressed a gentle, reverent kiss to the faint, silvery scar left by the paper cut. It's done, he said. I know, she replied. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, the only sound the soft scratch of charcoal on paper. My old life is gone, Wren said, her gaze fixed on the drawing she was finishing. A sketch of the city, not as a hunting ground, but as a place of breathtaking, hopeful beauty. My name, my home, everything. It's all gone. Good, Cillian said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single heavy key. It was attached to a simple leather fob, because I have been working on a new one for us. He stood and led her to the large drafting table. He unrolled a set of blueprints she had never seen before. It was a house, a beautiful, sprawling home of glass and stone, designed to be built on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was filled with light, with open spaces, with a studio for her and a library for him. It was not a fortress. It was a home. It's the first thing I've designed in 12 years, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. I started it the day after I brought you here. Tears welled in Wren's eyes as she traced the lines of the life he was offering her. A life of light and air and creation. A life built not on the ashes of his father's sins, but on the foundation of his own reclaimed dreams. She looked up at him, at this man who was both her storm and her harbor, her captor and her savior, her past and her future. The boy she had loved and the man he had become were finally one. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, tapping softly against the skylight. But it was not the cold, violent rain of a storm. It was the clean, quiet rain that washes the world new. Wren stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was not a kiss of coronation or desperation. It was a kiss of homecoming. And after the rain, there was only the promise of a quiet, sunlit morning.